Greetings, students. I was perusing through some of the articles which were shared by one of my students, which were dealing with this issue of nomination of ex-CJI Ranjan Gogoi to the remunerative political post in the legislative branch of the government. The nomination of former CJI Ranjan Gogoi to Rajya Sabha within 4 months of superannuation from the Supreme Court has been seen as an unabashed bonhomie between the executive and the judiciary. And this has led to a controversy mainly centering around two important facets, namely the denigration of the independence of the judiciary and its reputation, and compromising the principle of separation of powers amongst the three organs of the state. However, I feel that this issue has been presented narrowly, and this requires an attention in a much larger scope, which also includes the principle of judicial accountability. Given the fact that these three are being put together, then only we can understand in toto what judiciary is and how as an institution it must function. So what I try to do is, in this series of 6 lectures I am going to have on judiciary, I'll be first looking at some of the historical developments. I'll also looking at some of the recent developments that we have seen with respect to judiciary in terms of some of the episodes related to judiciary, and number 3, we will look at one after the other, including the constitutional provisions, how they must emancipate the independence of the judiciary and also the judicial accountability together, which leads us to the concluding part, in which we deal with how the reforms must be implemented in order to ensure that the judicial independence simultaneously along with unbiased judicial accountability is also ensured within the present constitutional scheme. Now look at how this issue has to be looked at. Apart from the appointment of the ex-CJI to the remunerative political post within the legislative branch of the government, we also have certain other developments in the recent past which also point us towards the other dimensions of the judiciary as an institution, such as the judicial accountability. Look at this particular statement issued by Justice Arun Mishra. Justice Arun Mishra, at this inaugural session of the International Judicial Conference 2020, whose theme was Judiciary and the Changing World, he has publicly praised the Prime Minister. This statement has been seen as a breach of the judicial independence, and probably this was also seen outwittingly as a step towards what is called as post-retirement benefits. Post-retirement benefits in the form of a remunerative political post. Secondly, we also have one more development in which the Ministry of Personnel, Public Grievances and Pension of the Government of India has issued an order on September 2nd, 2019, stating that the Appointments Committee of the Cabinet has approved the appointment of 2 serving officers of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change as expert members of NGT, National Green Tribunal. What is the issue with this particular order? The order states that the period of 3 years with effect from the date of assumption of the charge of the post or until further orders, whichever is earlier, has been given as tenure for these expert members. However, if you look at the National Green Tribunal Act 2010 and section 7 of this particular act, it states that the chairperson, the judicial member and the expert member of the tribunal shall hold office as such for a term of 5 years from the date on which they enter upon their office, but they are not eligible for reappointment. Given this particular provision under the law and given the statement in the order issued by the Ministry of Personnel, Public Grievances and Pension, we find that these use of the words until further orders or whichever is earlier in the order are problematic. This simply means that the expert members will be the members of the tribunal at the pleasure of the government. This is what its implication is. Hence, these implications are serious, for the tribunal will no longer be able to act as an independent quasi-judicial institution, but rather a body subordinate to the central government. Apart from this, there is one more development which needs further attention. Here, we also know that Justice S. Muralidhar has been transferred from the Delhi High Court to High Court of Punjab and Haryana. There are some suggestions which say that this is a step towards his appointment as Chief Justice at the Punjab and Haryana High Court. However, in order to conclude this, many legal luminaries say that there is nothing credible in this public domain, because of which these collective acts of transfer that the government has instituted are making practitioners question the process of transferring judges as a question against independence of judiciary. My point is, it is not just the appointment of ex-CJI Ranjan Gogoi to the House of Parliament which is the only issue that we have seen. There are a number of such issues which have cropped up, which certainly question the independence of judiciary and its accountability too. Apart from this, we also know that the ex-CJI, when he has been nominated to Rajya Sabha, he has issued certain statements in a televised interview where he said that there is presence of some lobby within the judicial system which is working against the independence of judiciary, and this has been seen as a dangerous posture against the independence of judiciary. My point is, if this is true, then this is a much more dangerous issue, and this is against the conscience of the nation and also the functioning of the constitution itself. Or if I go even beyond this, it is against the constitutionalism itself. So given these various developments that we have in the recent past, we just can't limit our scope of discussion just to the issue of post-retirement political appointments that the judges or the Chief Justice of India going to accept, but this has to be taken much further, such that we also look at the issue of not only the judicial independence, but in association with it, the issue of judicial accountability, which together leads us to the entire constitutional scheme of functioning of this institution called judiciary. Here, some quarters have looked at the above two facets of the judicial independence and also the separation of powers principle from the legal and constitutional perspective and also the historical paradigm, and by looking at from these two paradigms, they have supported this move of nominating ex-CJI to the Rajya Sabha. What was the constitutional and legal paradigm that was available for us in terms of such a support? This support must also be known by us, because the question might also ask us to comment about this nomination in the main examination. In this comment, you can give a positive answer or even a negative answer. How positively we have to write about this issue? Now, looking at this particular issue from the legal and constitutional perspective, let me first look at what is the purpose of the upper house here. If I have to present it in terms of some of the statements given by some of the legal luminaries in the Constituent Assembly, let me look at the statement of Gopalaswamy Iyengar. Gopalaswamy Iyengar has observed that the most that we accept from the second chamber to do is perhaps to hold dignified debates. And he also said that these debates must be on important issues, and along with that he says that the second chamber has the duty of delaying legislation which might be the outcome of passions of the moment until the passions have subsided, and calm consideration could be bestowed on the measures which will be before the legislature. So these are the two very important functions of the second chamber. Thirdly, he says that we also give an opportunity perhaps to seasoned people who may not be in the thickest of the political fray, but who might be willing to participate in the debate with an amount of learning and importance which we do not ordinarily associate with a house of the people. Given these three dimensions, we know the purpose of the Rajya Sabha is to have particularly the dignified debate and much deeper debates on important issues. Similarly, if I look at one modern opinion of Sri Muhammad Hamid Ansari. He points out that one of the objectives of the Rajya Sabha is to act as a deliberative chamber where greater and diverse experience is brought to bear on the questions of significance. Now, if I look at Article 80 of the Constitution of India, with this particular background that has been provided by these luminaries on the legislative politics, we understand that under Article 80 of the Constitution, which postulates the nomination of 12 members by the President of India to Council of States, and also which says that these persons having special knowledge or practical experience in respect of such matters as literature, science, art and social service must be nominated. It gives us the clear understanding that these are the seasoned people who can have their important deliberations in the upper house such that this can lead to the dignified debate. This is what Article 80 of the Constitution is meant for, and hence this has to be looked at from the perspective that we have developed with these two statements from Gopal Swami Iyengar and Muhammad Hamid Ansari. If I have to apply this particular provision with the constitutional background that has been given by both of these luminaries, then the appointment of Justice Ranjan Gogoi to Rajya Sabha seems to be normal. Apart from this, what were the various instances of eminent former Chief Justices or judges accepting government posts after their retirement in the past will also tell us whether this has been followed as a part of some of the developments that we already had. So there are several instances in the past too. If you look at the appointment of Justice Koka Subbarao, Justice Koka Subbarao, who was the 9th Chief Justice of India, who has retired from this particular post in 1967. He was contesting for the post of President of India in 1967. Here, he was appointed as a candidate of the United Opposition Parties. However, he lost the elections to Zakir Hussain. Secondly, we also have the example of Justice K.S. Hegde. K.S. Hegde was Judge of the Supreme Court of India. He has resigned from this particular post in 1973 and was thereafter elected to the Lok Sabha from Bangalore South constituency on Janata Party ticket in the year 1977. And here, after several months, he became the Speaker of Lok Sabha when his predecessor Neelam Sanjeev Reddy has resigned from that particular post. Thirdly, we know Justice Dalbir Bhandari. Dalbir Bhandari, who was Judge of the Supreme Court of India, retired from this post in 2012 and was thereafter nominated by Government of India as its official candidate for the post of member at International Court of Justice. Here, he won these elections and was sworn in as a member of the International Court of Justice in June 2012. Justice Bhandari, since he is continuing as the judge in this International Court of Justice. Fourthly, we know Justice K.G. Balakrishnan, who was the 37th Chief Justice of India. He retired from this post of Chief Justice of India in 2010 and then immediately he was appointed as Chairman of National Human Rights Commission in June 2010 itself. Within a month, he was given this particular post. Again, we have the example of Justice S. Rajendra Babu, who was the 34th Chief Justice of India. Once he has retired from this post, he was also given this chairmanship of National Human Rights Commission in 2007. Justice Rajendra Babu. Along with this, we also know Justice H.L. Dattu, who retired from this post of Chief Justice of India, was also given this chairmanship of National Human Rights Commission. In fact, there are several laws of the country which provide for appointment to several such positions where the basic qualification would be to serve as a judge or Chief Justice of a High Court or judge or Chief Justice of Supreme Court. Therefore, looking at this particular nomination as denigration of independence of judiciary or against the mandate of the law or even against the mandate of the constitution is questionable. This is how the historical background and the constitutional background and legal background with respect to such post-retirement appointments is giving us some picture. However, if you have a closer look at various developments in which are associated with Ranjan Gogoi as Chief Justice of India, and if you look at this particular issue from various dimensions of judicial accountability, this gives us a broader picture. If I look at the Gogoi's record as Chief Justice of India, probably, broadly speaking, there were three kinds of politically sensitive cases that he has handled. The first were those he presided over, where he went in favor of the government. Especially, you can look at two important cases of Rafale aircraft and the Ayodhya verdict, where they were politically favoring the incumbent government. Secondly, if I look at the petitions demanding his position in the bench, like the legality of the electoral bonds, or the constitutionality of scrapping of Article 370, the communications blockade and the mass arrests in Jammu and Kashmir. These are the second type of cases in which he was seen. Thirdly, there were those cases which seemingly went against the government, especially the cases in which CBI director's matter was seen and the entry of women worshippers at Sabarimala. However, there was a space that was created allegedly by the Supreme Court benches, where eventually the government will have its way. So Alok Verma was reinstated as CBI director, but he was left powerless till the government was able to legally move its person into that particular position, as alleged by some of the practitioners in the bar of Supreme Court. Secondly, the Sabarimala verdict, which was immediately sent for review, and then this was referred to a larger bench just before the retirement of Justice Gogoi, presumably setting the stage for its possible overturning, as they allege. So these are the cases which are politically sensitive, and probably they say that there was some element of quid pro quo. As they see. However, there were also certain cases where these rulings went against the government, in which Gogoi was a part. There was a unanimous judgment given by a 5-judge bench of the Supreme Court, which struck down the rules formulated by the center regarding the appointment and service conditions for members of various tribunals under Finance Act of 2017. The bench also referred this question of money bill as defined under Article 110 of the Constitution and the certification accorded by the Speaker of the Lok Sabha in respect of the Finance Act of 2017 to a larger bench. Here it was clearly going against the government. So even though you have certain judgments which have been passed against the government, however, dismissing critics as those who are continuously leveling unwarranted, unsubstantiated allegations against a former Chief Justice of India, it would undermine the legitimacy of the judiciary and the institution as a whole. So even if we give ex-CJI Gogoi the benefit of doubt in all these cases, perhaps these judgments were really the product of his fine legal mind and not some sordid quid pro quo. Remember, the critics point out that there is a flaw in the entire career of ex-CJI Gogoi, which brought the court into disrepute and now cast a shadow over even Parliament also. Here, the issue is of the handling of the allegation of sexual harassment which was leveled against him by a junior court assistant. Even if we give him the benefit of doubt on the veracity of this actual harassment charge, remember the critics have pointed out that the way ex-CJI Gogoi has tried to implicate himself by the two processes that he has set in motion to supposedly clear his name were clearly going against the impartiality of the Supreme Court. First, the woman, her husband, and the brothers-in-law were subjected to a vicious vendetta that included dismissal and being framed for crimes they allegedly never committed. So none of that could have happened, remember, according to critics, without a push from the powerful quarters. Secondly, they say that when this alleged vendetta came into the public domain along with the woman's allegation of sexual harassment, Gogoi was criticized as being instrumental in ensuring a hideous judicial cover-up. In this, he presided over a special sitting of Supreme Court where it was convened to hear his own case. Nowhere you find such a precedence. No one can be judge of his own case is the fundamental natural principle of justice that was violated according to these critics in this particular issue. It is an act of astonishing judicial impropriety that he has pompously called a matter of great public importance touching upon the independence of the judiciary, where he slandered the young woman who had complained against him and claimed he was the victim of a bigger plot to deactivate him from this independence of judiciary. Though an in-house inquiry was subsequently formed and it has declared the woman charges against Gogoi as baseless, the opposite was confirmed by the dropping of the fabricated extortion case against her and her husband and her quiet reinstatement this year in January. So, if there is conspiracy that ex-CJI Gogoi saw in her charges, nothing has been seen or heard since her reinstatement. So in any polity that values transparency, in any judicial system that upholds the rule of law, the young woman's allegations would have been dealt with more transparency and more accountability. However, this was not the case according to critics in this particular whole episode. So you find that Justice Patnaik, who was appointed by the Supreme Court to inquire whether there was a conspiracy to frame Justice Gogoi following allegations of harassment against him by a woman employee of the court, said that a former CJI or even a judge of the Supreme Court should not accept nomination to Rajya Sabha or even contest for Rajya Sabha. Such nomination or contest will raise a lot of doubt about the independence of the judiciary. He further says, why would a Chief Justice at the peak of the judicial system at all accept such a nomination, and why would a government offer this to him? If they want real experts in the House to lead dignified debates over the matters of public importance, then he says that let them nominate experienced lawyers like K. Parasaran or Fali Nariman or KTS Tulasi. He says they could have even gone for legal academicians like Upendra Bakshi, but why a Chief Justice? This is how there were many questions and doubts which were cast over the nomination of ex-CJI to the upper house. However, when I look at it from the other perspective, as we were looking at it from the historical perspective, there are two precedences that we must look at. In the past, two judges, that is former Chief Justice Ranganath Mishra and Judge Beharul Islam, have been inducted to the Rajya Sabha. So to argue that there is nothing wrong with Justice Ranjan Gogoi's nomination to the Rajya Sabha is a proposition probably which has some reasoning in terms of this convention. However, critics point out that Ranganath Mishra's appointment to Rajya Sabha and before that his chairmanship of NHRC as the first chairman was primarily, according to them, because of the fact that Justice Ranganath Mishra was alleged to have given a clean chit to the then government, for its role in the 1984 anti-Sikh riots in Delhi. And even with respect to Beharul Islam, we find that this has been given to him as a remunerative post retirement for delivering a judgment favorable towards the incumbent government. Given these two allegations put forward against him, they cannot be served as some important precedents for Justice Gogoi to accept this nomination. Apart from this particular issue, remember, as I told you, this issue can't be limited to just the issue of judicial independence. This must also be looked at from the perspective of judicial accountability. There is one single most important episode which has brought in this issue of judicial accountability in association with judicial independence. That episode is of the suicide of Kaliko Pul. Kaliko hanged himself in the Chief Minister's Bangla on August 9, 2016, leaving behind 10 copies of a 60-page typed suicide note in Hindi, which he has titled as Mere Vichar. Mere Vichar. Here, Pul, who was a Congress rebel who became the Chief Minister of the northeastern state of Arunachal Pradesh in February 2016, was only in power till July 2016 before he was forced to step down thanks to a Supreme Court verdict. Kaliko Pul had brought down the government of Nabam Tuki and became Chief Minister in 2016 in February month, and the central government revoked President's rule after 3 weeks, which had enabled Pul to be sworn in as Arunachal Pradesh Chief Minister. But in July 2016, the Constitution Bench, which had heard multiple challenges to this Game of Thrones in the state, delivered a verdict which has reinstated Nabam Tuki back again. Then we find that Nabam Tuki made way for Prema Khandu, the present Chief Minister. However, Khandu and his entire group of supporting MLAs had quit Congress, and then later they have merged with a regional party, and later on this entire regional party was merged with BJP. That Kaliko Pul committed suicide in August within a month of the Arunachal Pradesh verdict, and purportedly left this 60-page note in Hindi affixing his signature on every page and to every correction, which suggests that the note's objective was something more than merely stating the reasons for his suicide. So, Kaliko Pul's wife, Dhanvimsai Pul, wrote a letter to 3 senior judges of the Supreme Court, Justice J. Chalameshwar, Ranjan Gogoi, and Madan B. Lokor. She said that, in particular, as he has mentioned, an instance of him personally having gone and paid money to the then Finance Minister of India, Sri Pranab Mukherjee, who later became the President of India, and there were allegations of bribery or attempted bribery against 2 former Chief Justices, the current Chief Justice of India and the second senior most judge in the Supreme Court. So, having these at most serious judicial allegations leveled against the Supreme Court, it is necessary that the Supreme Court must act in constitutional propriety. However, the puritanical norm of propriety, which has been suggested by the Supreme Court of India, which has used it extensively to demand propriety from the members of the public service commissions, state politicians, public prosecutors, and even selection authorities for engineering exams, however, has failed to observe the same propriety when an extraordinary allegation was made against former 4 Chief Justices of India. Yet the court and conscience keepers are surprisingly silent, according to these critics. So the endemic nature of corruption in high places of the judiciary has been the key aspect that this particular suicide note of Kaliko Pul has brought out. He stated that the son of the one of the chief justices, Ram Avatar Sharma, has approached his associates and demanded 49 crores. He also said that Aditya Mishra, the brother of Deepak Mishra, demanded 37 crores. Kaliko also said former Chief Justices H.L. Dattu and Altmas Kabir took bribes of 28 crore and 36 crore respectively in various issues. So all these approaches and bribes were with a view to securing favorable judicial orders. This is what his primary allegation was: favorable judicial orders. So this highest level of corruption that has been seen in the higher judiciary is what the primary question that must be looked at, along with the judicial independence that we were seeking to achieve. So both these put together, we find that it is not just the judicial independence but even the judicial accountability that is very, very important. In the aftermath of the Supreme Court judgment on the trust vote in the Arunachal Assembly, which went against Kaliko, so these charges may ultimately turn out to be allegations made by a losing litigant. This might be the picture that would be presented by some of the corners. However, when such allegations are made in considerable detail with the names and also the exact amounts which have been asked for by a long-term public servant and someone who has sacrificed his own life to lend credence to his views, the claims deserve greater respect, or at least these claims deserve due process. Unfortunately, a curious set of events ensued once Dangvim Sai Pul, who is Kaliko's wife, wrote a letter to the CJI asking for his sanction to proceed with a police investigation into the contents of the letter. So in a surprising move, the letter was converted presumably by the then Chief Justice of India himself, since he is the master of roaster, into what is called as a criminal writ petition, CWP, to be heard by the Supreme Court on the judicial side. However, if you observe the convention or the norm that was set out by the judgment of the Supreme Court itself, in this case of K. Veeraswamy versus Union of India and others, where the court held that if a complaint is made against the CJI, another appropriate judge must be the sanctioning authority. That means the CJI's decision to convert Kaliko's letter to a criminal writ petition was absurd, since there was no evidence of a dispute that required judicial resolution, and to convert a simple letter requiring administrative sanction according to the law into a petition on the judicial side hence would be both unlawful and of course unusual too. This is where we talk of the judicial accountability as a key and important issue along with judicial independence. But the critical question in this particular case is not just of legality, it is of the propriety. In matters involving high functionaries of the state, the Supreme Court has often ordered special investigation teams to uncover the truth, which is free of any political interference. So the sit into the coal scam probably is one of the prominent recent examples that we have. So in the instances of judicial misconduct, the Supreme Court Collegium has requested generally the judges who are suspected of any corruption to go on to a leave until the investigation is completed. However, such a request was made to Justice P.D. Dinakaran, then the Chief Justice of the Karnataka High Court, who has set some precedence in terms of this when senior members of the bar had made grave charges of misconduct against him. But it appears that the same principles of propriety probably was not applicable to the Supreme Court itself when such charges were leveled against the CJI himself. So with great respect, one might have ordinarily expected the CJI to not exercise any authority, administrative or otherwise, in a matter where he has been rightly or wrongly implicated. Further, propriety might equally demand that the judges who are implicated go on leave, facilitating a free and fair investigation into the matter if sanction is accorded. But in a telling indictment of this degradation of norms of propriety in the higher judiciary, this appears to be probably just the wishful thinking. So on the contrary, both of these judges started continuing laying down the law of the land for scores of litigants before them and even the issues of national importance. So this raised serious questions not only against the independence of the judiciary but also the jealousness of the protection of this independence, keeping aside the need for judicial accountability. In a grave situation, as this current episode points out, when investigation agencies under the supervision of the government have discretion whether to register a case against the named judges and the president on the advice and aid of the government, not even the slightest move is being taken by the court under the guise of protecting its own independence, as the critics point out. So scarcely has the rule of law been damaged so severely by the judicial inaction is what the question that has cropped up. So ultimately, this is not a question which is limited to hence four of these senior judges senior retired judges and the allegations made against them. It's a question about preserving the moral authority of the court. So if the Supreme Court genuinely believes that other institutions have to be above suspicion, then it is time to practice what it preaches. As Fali Nariman has pointed out, the citadel never falls except from within. So today it seems that we are in such a situation where the judiciary is falling and judiciary seems to be reinstated only from within. This is where the judicial accountability also as an issue is very, very pertinent. As Justice A.P. Shah, the respected former Chief Justice of Delhi High Court, has stated, he says that the perceived Gogoi's Rajya Sabha appointment is a quid pro quo in the light of various judgments which were seen as controversial. He says that if you give judgments that are favorable to the executive, you will be rewarded. If you don't do so, you will be treated adversely, or you might be transferred, or you are not considered for any elevation. So these charges are very, very serious against the judiciary but not against an individual. As I was telling you, Justice Kurian Joseph, Justice Madan B. Lokur and Justice Jasti Chalameshwar, who were also part of this January 2018 press conference which was held against then Chief Justice of India Deepak Mishra, who especially has been criticized for his conduct in the matter of allocation of important cases on the basis of his leadership in the court as the master of roster. They have also criticized the role of Justice Gogoi in his acceptance of this particular nomination to the upper house of the parliament. Justice Kurian Joseph stated that this has compromised the noble principles of independence and impartiality of the Supreme Court. Justice Madan B. Lokur says that this redefined the independence, impartiality and integrity of the Supreme Court. However, Jasti Chalameshwar has taken this to the next level. He stated that there never was a democracy that did not commit suicide. This is a very, very far-reaching statement, taking us to the conclusion that the reinstatement of the judicial credence needs not only the principle of independence of judiciary, but also it needs an objective basis, the principle of the judicial transparency and accountability. Given the fact that this statement was given by Arun Jaitley when he was in the opposition in the Rajya Sabha, This statement assumes lot of significance given the historical background that we have understood till now. He said that there are two kinds of judges, those who know the law, those who know the law, and those who know the law minister. So he says we are the only country in the world where judges are appointing judges. Even though there is a retirement age, judges are not willing to retire. Pre-retirement judgments are influenced by post-retirement jobs. This has been a statement given by the former Law Minister of India, Arun Jaitley, on the floor of Rajya Sabha itself. Moreover, the Supreme Court has ruled that the country's information commissions, the National Commission, is flanked by one in every state, must be headed by either a retired judge or a serving judge from a High Court of the Supreme Court. Information commissions, we know that, handle thousands of applications filed by the public under the Right to Information Act, which allows access to the government's documents. The judgments also said that every application or petition should be heard by two people, one of whom must be a retired or serving judge or a lawyer with 20 years of experience. So the verdict has been again criticized by many legal luminaries as an employment scheme for judges. However, we have certain other examples too. In these examples, we find that these judges have set some proper proprietary precedents according to the need for the constitutional propriety. Former CJI of Delhi, former Chief Justice of Delhi High Court, Tirath Singh Thakur, who, when offered a seat in the Rajya Sabha by the Aam Aadmi Party in 2017, it was politely turned down because accepting that offer could lower the prestige of the high office he has held. So, this issue of constitutional propriety with respect to the judiciary has set some other precedents too, which are in tune with the constitutionalism. However, if we observe that this issue of accountability and this issue of independence is limited to judiciary alone, it is wrong. We have these instances of compromise with the independence and accountability even with various other constitutional offices that we have. We can cite some examples here. We can take into consideration one example here. Former Chief Election Commissioner M.S. Gill, who was functioning as the Chief Election Commissioner, we know that he is a constitutional functionary. However, he was given 2 terms of Rajya Sabha by the executive, and then later he was also made a union minister. Meaning, as I tell you, as we discuss this issue of importance of independence and accountability as 2 facets of the entire constitutional offices, whatever we have, including judiciary, this is not just limited to judiciary, and this understanding must and can be extended to various other constitutional offices. We shall look at what was the stand of the Constituent Assembly on this issue of post-retirement and how we can extend this discussion both to independence and accountability together in the next session.